Slovakia and Hungary are increasing pressure on Ukraine with the aim of resuming supplies of Russian oil. In particular, Slovak Prime Minister Robert Fico reiterated his threat to block a loan for Ukraine after Hungary did so. Hungary vetoed new EU sanctions against Russia and a €90 billion loan for Ukraine.
I will propose to the President of the European Commission Slovakia's capabilities for repairs. If somewhere on the Druzhba pipeline a bolt really needs to be tightened, then so be it. But the most important message will be that Slovakia is ready to take over from Hungary if necessary.
Hungary has already blocked a €90 billion loan for Ukraine and the 20th EU sanctions package against Russia. All this is to force Kyiv to resume deliveries of Russian oil through the Druzhba pipeline. On March 9th, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban called on the European Union to suspend all restrictions on Russian energy. He addressed a corresponding letter to the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen. In Orban's opinion, such a step will prevent an increase in diesel and gasoline prices. At the same time, no accusations against the Kremlin came from Budapest. On the contrary, Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó once again visited Moscow to obtain guarantees that Russia would continue supplying oil and gas to the country. In Kyiv, it has been repeatedly stated that the transit of Russian fuel was halted after January 27th. The Russian army struck the energy infrastructure in the Lviv region. The pipeline received raw materials. With serious damage, it will take a significant amount of time to repair it.
The capacity of this oil pipeline is 75,000 tons, making it the largest in all of Central Europe. It was destroyed. There is no technological sense or safety reason to restore it, because another shelling, missile or drone could destroy it again. Therefore, in the future, we need to build underground casemate-type storage facilities according to NATO standards. These so-called reserve tank farms will operate continuously and, I emphasize, safely with various grades and types of oil. In
early March, President Volodymyr Zelensky announced that the Druzhba oil pipeline, which was damaged as a result of Russian strikes, would likely be able to resume operations in a month to a month and a half. The European Commission, in response to a joint letter from Budapest and Bratislava regarding the situation with the Druzhba oil pipeline, did not support the position of these countries. This was stated by Hungarian Foreign Minister Péter Szijjártó. According to him, Brussels took Ukraine's side in this matter. The European Commission could have acted as an independent party to objectively clarify all the circumstances of the incident involving the detention in Hungary of Ukrainian cash couriers as well as the currency and gold on March 5th, said the head of the National Bank, Andrei Pishny. He assured that the National Bank is actively communicating with European partners to ensure that the incident does not go without an appropriate response. With its decision to detain Ukrainian cash couriers, Hungary has crossed a dangerous line. This strongly resembles the actions of Moscow, emphasized Ukraine's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andriy Sybiha. According to him, the closer it gets to the elections, the more often Budapest uses the Ukrainian issue for its domestic politics. The detention of Ukrainian cash couriers in Hungary would have been more surprising if it hadn't happened. Just a few days after the visit of the Hungarian foreign minister to Moscow, noted Polish Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz.
This is an important topic for discussion within the entire European Union. International law must be observed. If Russia violates international law and we protest against it, then we should not act the same way ourselves. We cannot apply the same standards. I do not know or understand the reasons for the detention. It seems to be part of a political struggle. Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, Minister of Defense of Poland, from a statement at a press conference in Warsaw. At the same time,
Hungarian opposition leader Péter Mader stated that he has information about the arrival of Russian military intelligence in Budapest. He demanded that Viktor Orban immediately stop foreign interference in the internal affairs of the state. Kristina Dombrovskaya for Freedom TV channel.
Lyudmila Pokrovchuk, Doctor of Philosophy, expert in foreign and domestic policy, is joining us today. Lyudmila, we welcome you. Hello.
good evening.
Hello.
And I want to say there's nothing new from Orban or from Fico either. Yes, from time to time. Well, with Fico, it just happens in cycles, you know, let's put it this way.
Yes, it's like a sine wave.
Thank you so much. Like an electrocardiogram, a sine wave. And sometimes it gets disrupted like this, yes, and periodically, yes, he takes the same, well, I mean, he voices the same initiatives as Orban. Yes, well, obviously, especially when we talk about weakening sanctions against the Russian Federation, It's clear that this isn't Orban's or Fico's idea or desire, right? So whose desire is it?
Literally just today, Putin stated that Russia could potentially resume natural gas and energy supplies to Europe against the backdrop of Hungary's appeal to the European Union about the complexity of the situation. And this is despite the fact that just yesterday or the day before, he was saying the exact opposite. We heard it ourselves that they could to completely stop deliveries there, and now today they might resume all of it again. But yes, it was noted that they are waiting for certain signals from Europe, of course. Therefore, yes, you are absolutely right. Of course, the current situation, this geopolitical situation surrounding the energy market, connected to what is happening in the Middle East, is now playing to the maximum advantage of the Russian Federation. And of course, Russia will now make the most of it. So all of them, all such politicians like Orban and Fitzer, of course, want to resume, especially since they are particularly interested, no matter how much they say, no, Europe, they claim they've diversified the market and have other suppliers now, but that's not the case. That market they had, the European market, that lucrative market, which allowed them to live very well and accumulate resources thanks to their energy budget, their oil and gas revenues. Let's put it that way. Of course, they haven't found another market like it. They haven't replaced it. And we know about the problems with Gazprom and with other companies, including oil companies, and the fact that production was halted. Therefore, of course, Russia now more than ever really wants to restore relations with Europe, especially when it comes to economic renewal in the sphere of energy resources. And of course, let's not forget that if there is even the slightest attempt at rapprochement, even if it's just a small step towards Russia, towards Europe, if there is any kind of easing, then of course this will also have an impact on the issue of the Russian-Ukrainian war. But Russia, I think, is really counting on this right now, hoping that Europe might find itself in a certain kind of deadlock, especially an economic one, because we understand perfectly well, and many economists have already spoken about this, everyone has commented on it, that the longer everything continues in the Middle East, the more it will, of course, affect the economies of different countries, especially a bloc like the European Union, because their main diversification, which took place, was really replaced by supplies from the Persian Gulf countries. And now, of course, especially when it comes to Qatar, even regarding LNG, although there is some diversification with the United States, most of it, of course, was with Qatar. Now, all of that has stopped. Of course, there are reserves. Europe has stated that they have reserves. But nevertheless, reserves only work if what is happening in the Middle East stops for at least 3 weeks, a month at most. But if it lasts longer, we understand perfectly well that now there is already information that even though the countries, the G7, and in principle at first considered opening certain reserves because there was a request from the United States and some G7 members, but information has already come out that since Brent crude prices in trading have already dropped below $100 today, of course, they will not open these reserves and will continue to watch how the market reacts. But politicians like Orban and Fico, they will take full advantage of the situation. Although I should note, just recently there was information regarding Hungary that, of course, all of this is political blackmail because even before the situation in the Middle East, Hungarian oil refining companies had already ordered oil, and as of today, it has already arrived and is sitting at Croatian terminals. So the situation there is not as dire, and the Croatians have stated this. It's different from what Orban is claiming. But we perfectly understand why he is doing this, because literally sociological polls have just come out and there is a difference between his party's position of almost 20%. Of course, now the peak is beginning. This is the peak of his election campaign, and there isn't much time left. Literally about a month remains until the elections. And this rhetoric, and not just rhetoric, his latest actions, especially regarding our cash couriers, already show just how difficult things are for Orban with the elections, that he is resorting to such measures. And as for Fico, why shouldn't Fico take advantage as well right now? He's also engaging in a certain kind of blackmail. And regarding the 90 billion, although it should be noted, the situation in Slovakia isn't quite the same. It's not as much of a stalemate as Fico presents it to be. It's just that right now everyone is trying to take maximum advantage of the difficulties that have arisen in the energy market, specifically those related to the Middle East. But of course, they are being pushed by the Russian Federation. Well, it's clear that Hungary has always been a kind of Trojan Russian horse in Europe. And now Fico is being added to that from time to time. He is taking full advantage of the situation. And considering this current anti-Ukrainian escalation of the issue that's happening in Hungary, why wouldn't Fico take advantage of it and push these matters even harder? Of course, especially by putting pressure on the European Commission regarding energy resources. Well, we'll see how it all unfolds, of course. But so far, we've seen a statement from Ursula von der Leyen that things aren't quite as bad as Fico and Orban claim. It's not as bad as Fico and Orban are saying, and basically they are looking for ways to unblock the 90 billion. But the most interesting thing was this statement from Ursula von der Leyen. This was at the meeting with the EU ambassadors, and the main message was very tough, that against the backdrop of such geopolitical challenges as the Russia-Ukraine war, and now, once again, what's happening in the Middle East, Europe, the European Union, can no longer afford to deal with the complexity of consensus voting, especially when it comes to political issues and particularly foreign policy. This was stated by her. She also called for the need to begin reforming decision-making on foreign policy issues as quickly as possible now more than ever. And for them, most of their foreign political issues are decided, as we know, according to the documents of the European Union, according to their statutes, specifically by consensus voting. Because when it comes to economic issues, for example, like even when it came to allocating some funds to Ukraine and other economic matters, a majority vote could be used there. And we know that they managed to get around it. This is the right of veto that they have. And as for foreign policy issues, only consensus voting applies. That's why Orban, for example, can afford to blackmail us on such an issue as Ukraine's accession to the European Union, because after all, this is a political issue, first and foremost. So today, this is a very interesting message. Ursula von der Leyen, I think that it's not just that their time has come, but that they are faced with such a choice today, or else they will continue to completely lose geopolitical power. This subjectivity, or are they beginning to renew their influence geopolitical? Something is certainly needed, and I will do something about this conservative vote. Without this, they simply won't be able to solve these issues, because they are facing such a challenge as Orban and now also Fico. Tomorrow they will have, let's not forget, the Czech Republic, Babiš. Then there's also, as we would have it, the question of Poland. Even though it's our closest neighbor, there is still this certain political crisis between the Prime Minister and the President of Poland. This could also be disadvantageous, of course, for the European Union, especially when it comes to making quick decisions. That's why, as I said, the situation in Europe today is certainly complicated, especially in the European Union, but not nearly as much as Orban makes it out to be. He is simply taking full advantage of the situation, claiming to be some kind of super savior for Hungary. Yes, there was even another interesting remark. Even his foreign minister, Szijjártó, made a remark that if they lose, then, of course, Hungarians will end up facing huge bills, huge utility payments, and no one will be able to protect them anymore. And today, only Orban and his party are protecting them. That's the kind of slogans they're already using now, and that they, and only thanks to them, thanks to Prime Minister Orban, the European Commission is still talking to Hungary and listening to such weighty arguments, as they put it, about the development and future of the European Union. Otherwise, without them, there will be no future for the European Union at all.